Hey, community groups. So 2 Corinthians 5 is a very complex passage, but I'm going to go through it real quick right now. So I've never really been a camping person. I've never really understood the appeal myself of this tent life. But when I talk to people who do love camping, one of the phrases I often hear is they love being outdoors, which I get. It is lovely to be outdoors. But I think what's lovely about it is that at some point you know you have a home to go back to. I think if you were in a tent and you were living in a tent and you didn't have a home to go back to, I think the appeal would die off pretty quick. And that's kind of what our passage is about today. When our bodies are failing, when our lives do seem fragile, God has so much more than this tent life in our bodies right now that He has planned for us. Verses 1 and 2 say this: "For we know that if our earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal dwelling in the heavens not made with hands." So Paul's saying, yeah, we're living in this tent now in our bodies that are kind of weak and they are going to die. They are threatening to blow away when a bad storm does hit them, just like a tent. But we can put up with living in a tent now because we do know we have an eternal home in the heavens that God has prepared for us. He says in verse 3, "When we are clothed, we will not be found naked." So he's saying here, when we die, we won't be homeless. He's saying when we die, we won't be naked. When we die, we won't be without a body. God is going to provide everything we need and more. Which was contrary to some of what the Corinthian church, some people in the church were teaching. They were teaching that when we died, we would not have a body. We would just be a kind of spirit hovering in the ether somewhere. That the resurrection had already happened. It was only spiritual, all this stuff that Paul didn't really agree with. So when he says these words, he's saying, when we die in Christ, we aren't actually losing our body or our physicality. We're actually gaining a better body, a better physical existence. And we do this as we wait for our eternal resurrection bodies to come when Christ does come again. And verse 5 says that the one who prepared this for us for this purpose is God, who gave us this Spirit as a down payment. So if our new bodies are a house, the Spirit is talked about as being a deposit on this new house. And thankfully, we don't have to pay this deposit because God has paid this enormous price already in Christ. As He took on flesh, He took on poverty, He took on the powers of sin and death on the cross to buy us this hope, to buy us this deposit of a house with Him, of this Spirit being the deposit. But as for our lives now, our lives in this tent, as we wait for all this great stuff to happen, what does it actually look like for us to live in our tent life? Well, in the second half of verse 6, it kind of answers that question. It says, we know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord, for we walk by faith, not by sight. But what does it actually mean to do this, to walk by faith and not by sight? Well, I think it means to focus on eternal things by faith. To focus on the things that are unseen, the things that are eternal that Paul spoke about at the end of chapter 4. But how do we focus on things that are unseen? Well, I think for us right now, for people who are living in this weird existence that's kind of coming out of the threat of serious illness and death, I think there should be a real clarity that we do feel coming out of this on the eternal things that we do have to hope in. As our lives do start to piece by piece return to normal, it can be a little bit too easy for us to return to the same dreams, the same hopes, the same loves, the same idols even that we were looking to before, that forced our eyes downward instead of upward by faith. But if we're taking the words of 2 Corinthians 5 seriously, I think we should be making every effort to make sure this doesn't happen, that we are still trying to do our best with whatever clarity we have in the current season to focus on everything that is unseen, all the things that are eternal, that are our hope that we have before us. And so there are questions I think that will help us think about this, like how have the last few months given you clarity about your eternal hope and your heavenly home? How can you be rethinking your dreams, let go of the things that are maybe more of this world and to focus more on things that are eternal. Because Christ has placed his Spirit in us as a deposit for our hope. And if we are in Christ, then of course we're going to rejoice in this, we're going to hope in this, and we are confident in this hope because we do have the Spirit, ensuring all these things will happen, and we do live to please God in everything. By walking by faith, not by sight, always looking to these great unseen blessings that God has before us. So I think that's pretty much where 2 Corinthians 5 is going in this section. I hope you can get a lot out of chatting about those things in your community groups. I hope that gives you a bit more clarity. But there is so much for us here. I hope you do enjoy getting into it.